Warning: viewer discretion is advised, as images or stories may be disturbing. The Frowny Dog Chapter Two. It had been almost 8 years since Peter escaped the clutches of the Frowny Dog. 8 years since he had heard its menacing maw ferociously salivate over the corpse of the officer. A man doing his duty as a guard, overpowered by a malicious force of darkness. After the incident, Peter could clearly remember going to a police station, rambling with the flight of blood-stained moths in his head. They thought he was crazy for what he saw. They thought he wasn't in his right mind to be in society, covered in a thin layer of dark and gore. The modern law thought what they did soon after was rational. A trial was ensured and dubbed him guilty of criminal deeds, locking him up in a high security mental facility in Brooklyn. Though Brooklyn was farther away than where he saw the horrible mutilation, and the Frowny Dog couldn't possibly obtain him, the thought still festered in his mind, replaying red filtered flashes in his head until he screamed in agony. They didn't just frighten him, they hurt him. They stung his eyes and thrashed in his brain, making him go sleepless most nights, staring at the night sky outside of his cell window. Now he sat alone, heart punching against his sternum, awake to see if the Frowny Dog had creeped out under his bed to devour him whole with jagged teeth. Though his cell was made from massively thick walls, he could still hear the thrill of the city that never sleeps. It had just snowed briefly, leaving small specks of white powdered flakes on his barred windowsill. Peter laid twisted on his cot, donned in a clipped, egg-colored uniform, recently thinking that the monster he had encountered almost a decade ago was breathing on him, heavily but steady, harsh and humid, things uttered from the undertone of death. If he sat in certain angles, he could see the lights flashing from the cluttered herds of automobiles the more the day progressed. The same sense of when he was inside the darkness within his nightmares. The Frowny Dog's rabid consciousness matched its red pumping desires almost perfectly. But it seemed that the creature that Peter encountered all those years ago had something different in terms of pleasure. He overheard the psychiatrist speak of illness, a disease that engraved itself into his mind called schizophrenia. They thought that his relationship with the evil hound was an illusion placed into his brain. But he knew what he saw. He knew that it wanted to get him, and it was breaking him down while he was at his most vulnerable, trapped in the corner by a blood-coated feline while he was the terrified mouse begging for its miserable life. His heart began to beat faster in his chest. The sweat started to form and his throat became dry. He tossed and turned noisily in his bed, nervously bunching the sheets and whimpering softly under his breath. Peter progressed with this endeavor until he encased himself in a damp film of air. I'm safe. Nothing could possibly get me here, Peter thought, jittering his words, faintly remembering the conversation between him and the officer 8 years ago. Poor man. Poor man didn't even give me a ticket. His life was taken away from him too early. Yeah, but he deserved to die. He wasn't going to let you leave. You would be in the same situation you're in right now if he hadn't fallen to the darkness, possibly worse. Shut up, Peter replied to the voice taunting him, the whispers that identified itself with the shadows. You cannot escape your past, Peter. It'll always haunt you, just what the doctor said. it growled again, rustling its trollish form within the darkness of the room. Peter could hear the voice's cloven feet scar the tile floor below it. "Shut up," Peter said again, shutting his eyes with a distant snap. The owner of the harsh snarl stamped its hooves in the darkness, displeased with its failed efforts. Peter smiled in the haze, hearing the voice's ragged quills of hair scatter upon the walls as the thing slumped down and disappeared. Peter dozed off to sleep with the grin slathered on his face. The next morning, Peter had woken up to a surprise. Somebody had sent him a package through the mail. He couldn't have possibly known who it came from. Both of his parents were deceased, his brother was in India, and he didn't have many friends. Well, the ones he did know wouldn't have sent him anything. One of the staff who worked on the patients in the East Wing, Malcolm, delivered the package directly to Peter's door, just as he was walking out to get breakfast. They talked for a small span of time, which Peter consistently made Malcolm uncomfortable by looking at him with sunken eyes. Definition Peter had lost from many years of seclusion. Beside that, the package was handed directly to Peter, whom Witch put under his cot. He placed the blankets in order, sighed heavily, and left the room, sloughing his feet behind him at a tired pace. At the end of the day, Peter returned to his confinement after a long day of boring silence, seeing as how nobody was allowed next to each other. Everybody was given an activity, and left alone for an entire afternoon working to accomplish that one thing. For him, it was solitaire. Yeah, how ironic, he thought. It was nearing dark outside. There would be only an hour or so before everyone reaching sanity would be herded into their pens like unstable horses. Peter sat on his cot after shutting the door with a series of lazy knocks. His brain was slower than what he felt 8 years before. Probably would be brain dead next year during Christmas. Wouldn't that be sweet relief? Wouldn't have to listen to any damn doctors anymore as I urinate in my undies. He laughed harshly. That's when Peter felt the bulge, an irritated hard growth under his bed. And that's when he remembered the package. Peter then positioned himself in a way to peek under his bed. Seeing the large cardboard box lightly poofed with dust, he sighed. Even under the pressure of his butt, Peter could feel the weight of the package rest upon him. He clawed tediously at the package, seeming as the more he reached, the farther the package scurried away from his fingertips. But he muckled a hold, eventually, and pulled it towards his form with all of his strength. It bellowed horrendously as it pittered across the ground. The band holding the cardboard contraption together was slipping through his hands, having him to retain his grip multiple times until he fully pulled it out from the bed's gloomy cavern. Once he plastered it onto the surface of his bed, he saw that the bluish tinge of the afternoon sky had molded into a filthy violet. An hour or so until lights out. So he had to hurry if he wanted to get this present opened. He felt the rush he had 8 years ago. Fear, excitement, and mystery thrilling the blood strain in his thin veins. He opened the package's bonds pretty quickly, finding the oddest thing within the box. At the very center was a film reel for an old projector, caked on a layer of grime caused by aging. A thin piece of masking tape was inked on the reel's center, with the words "Good Boy" written in bold letters. The only projector he knew was in the entertainment room, where patients watched old movies like The Invisible Man, The Wizard of Oz, and Freaks. Last night it was Little Lord Fauntleroy. Strange how all the films in the asylum came out in the 1930s. This particular film reel looked like it came from the fresh era of movie stars and Universal Studios as well. If late If last night was video night, then the projector was still hot and up for grabs. Peter grabbed the box and stuffed the remains under his cot, stood up, and walked for the door. Peter had to be silent, clutching the massive reel in an X made by his hands. His breath was shallow, eyesight limited, brain functions decreasing. Everything seemed to be flowing into the reel. His life was becoming fuzzy, with everything being deleted, making up for potential storage. He was halfway down the hall by then, only the moonlight guiding him. This happened 8 years ago. Remember? The Frowny Dog had been lighted by the moon as it devoured that cop. Peter cut the voice off, making his way around the corner of the joining hallways, his hallway and the section of the East Wing. He listened to the moans of his housemates whimpering and whispering nonsense to themselves in their chambers. He grew more tired the farther he went, eyes blinking heavily as each step became more of a shuffle, and the shuffle became a drag. He yawned softly. His heartbeat fell rapidly as his legs made the announcement of wanting to walk at me. You're alone again. Once more after 8 long years. I haven't seen you in forever. And now you're alone to be mine once again. He smelled blood soon after the voice stopped speaking. It was fresh, riddling the air with sticky aromas that infected the sky. He made it to the movie room short after the stench had receded. His ears rang, his head began to throb, but it was faint, so he ignored it. The room was lit only by the bulb of a small reading lamp in the far corner. The projector was behind the main couch, a huge jet black machine that brooded alone in the shadows. It took him a while to insert the reel into the projector, but he placed it perfectly and flipped the switch on. Peter fell on the couch, laid down, and yawned loudly. The film started a few minutes after a number sequence and a credits roll. A small title card popped up on the wall with an upbeat cartoon theme song playing in the background. Peter yawned once again and felt the urge to drift off to sleep. But when he closed his eyes, something jolted at his feet. He ignored that. But then another motion bumped into his shoulder. Although slightly mad, he ignored that too. A silent movie began playing. A farmer lazily rocked on his barn porch, a piece of wheat lodged in his yellow teeth. Peter watched the film in a sleepy daze, not being cautious about the personnel finding him alone, out of his cell watching a movie. He saw the farmer stand up from his rocking chair and enter his house. But that's when things got disturbing. The man's floor was ransacked with dark tints flooding from the essence of two bodies, dead bodies, suffering from brutal injuries only an animal could inflict, one only inflicted by a very large animal. Peter saw the man grab a shotgun from his mantle. The farmer raised the barrel to his throat and started to cry. Peter sat up, distressed, gazing in fear as the man looked up from his tired eyes and said his blessings to his wife and daughter, sobbing about how he couldn't save them from the evil that devoured them. Then, as the man squeezed the trigger, Peter looked away, only hearing the blast interrupt the jolly music for a mere moment. The film ended with the reel running out of tape and Peter standing upwards to leave. But ironically, the good boy was waiting in the entrance. The same good boy he had seen 8 long years ago. The Frowny Dog was hunched on all fours, blocking the entrance with its massive physique. It drooled blood-stained streams from its titillating frown. But this time, Peter didn't want to escape. He wanted it to get him. He wanted it to end his life. He knew it wanted the same, how it hated the halt of a chase. The video was just a tease to the horrible things it has done in its foul existence. The Frowny Dog stepped forward, giggling murderously as it paced violently in the doorway, pieces of fabric flowing behind its rotting flesh. Come on, come get me, you damn mutt. The beast drew closer, splintering the ground with its enormous paws, slobbering the floor as it approached. Peter began to smile. He wouldn't have to suffer as he did for the past 8 years. Come on, you've been waiting for this. Come on, eat me! That's when the Frowny Dog stopped toying. It charged at him with the same intensity it used on the policeman. Peter stretched his arms outwards, sighed, and smiled. Smiled for the first time he had in so long. The pain would end and he would be free. The Frowny Dog pounced on him, forcing the two of them to the ground. The creature licked its lips with a cankerous slab of flesh and lunged, seizing Peter by the throat. Peter winced painfully, but didn't scream. He deserved to be taken. The beast snarled as it bared its fangs. Peter cried as he felt the teeth dig into his neck. This was his fate, and the best experience he had been given in his entire life. The end.